Welcome to the USO. This is Betsy McWhirt, Director of Volunteer Services, and it's great to have you on the team. If you have a job with the USO, chances are good, probably 999 to 1, that you will be working with volunteers. So here are some tips to help make your experience both enjoyable and successful. Before we get started, be sure to have in front of you the handbook Working with Volunteers so you can page through as you get oriented. You also might want to tab pages 21, 22, and 23, as we'll look at these with a little more depth in a few minutes. Volunteers have been at the heart and soul of the USO for nearly 70 years, helping to lift the spirits of America's troops and their families. In 2009 alone, over 20,000 volunteers at more than 140 centers across the globe donated approximately 1,052,000 hours. Ranging in age from 19 to 90, USO volunteers can be young or seasoned, active duty military or retired, mothers or fathers, spouses or family members, friends, or just ordinary citizens who care about our troops and their families. They work at airport centers, welcome visitors, feed troops, run special events, implement programs such as United Through Reading, and much, much more. In 2009, the USO served nearly 7.7 million troops and their families. Without the support of volunteers, there's simply no way we could deliver our mission to so many with so few resources. It's estimated that volunteers donated nearly $21.5 million in services last year. But beyond the dollar value, it's important for us to think about additional value that volunteers bring to their service. They provide us added expertise when they know how to do something we don't. They bring new perspectives when we get stuck in the "we've always done it this way" mode. They energize us when we've been at our duty stations for too many hours or for too many days. And they can give that added TLC to a troop or family member just at the right time. Before we continue, it's important for both volunteers and staff to know that volunteer service with the USO is a privilege and not a right. Volunteers serve at the sole discretion of the USO, and the USO may elect to discontinue a volunteer's services at any time. Well, that's kind of an intimidating statement. Don't we want to encourage volunteers to come work for us? Absolutely. That's why it's important to note that volunteers aren't free. They require time, supervision, structure, motivation, and recognition, which can be as simple and meaningful as a thank you at the end of the day. It's up to us to know how to invest in our volunteers so they will feel the honor and privilege of serving our troops in a positive, well-structured environment. So why do people volunteer? Many factors can motivate somebody to volunteer. And the more you understand about your volunteers, the better you'll be able to manage them and match them to the right job. All should be committed to the mission, but it's also okay if they are looking for some self-development, skills building, or that they simply want some fellowship or feelings of affiliation. If a volunteer's motivation doesn't fit with what you're trying to accomplish, then another volunteer organization might be better for them. It's up to us as paid staff to ensure that we are providing the right environment for our volunteers to be successful. Have you created good program structure for your volunteers? Do you know what you want them to do? Do they have a written volunteer assignment they can look at? Is the right staff person someone who wants to work with volunteers, supervising them? Is the right volunteer in the right job? Have you trained them successfully on their tasks? Have you given them all the right tools for success? Remember, no one ever volunteers to do a bad job, so we have to ensure that they have all the resources they need to do a good job. I just mentioned creating good program structure. Along with creating a good description of the volunteer opportunity, you should also ensure you have a volunteer interest form for the volunteer that documents all his or her important contact information, interests, skills, and other talents. It's also recommended that you interview a volunteer if they are to join your operations for any length of time. Putting the wrong person in the wrong volunteer position can be just as frustrating for your operations as it would if you were putting the wrong employee in the wrong job. So make sure you talk about what would be a good match before making any offers that might not work out in the end. And as I mentioned, be sure you give them the tools for success, including a chair and a computer if that's what's needed for the job. And don't just bring them on board and let them sink or swim on their own. Be sure to follow up with them regularly. Ask if they're doing okay and if they need anything. If you see them going in the wrong direction, gently guide them back on the right path. Volunteers need supervision and constructive feedback just as you will need it as you start your new job. Saying thank you to a volunteer each and every time they complete their assignment is one of the most important parts of our jobs as volunteer managers. Most volunteers don't want or need big gifts. They just want to know that the time they've spent giving to the troops and families is valued. But there are also other important ways you can recognize volunteers. Ask their opinions about things or include them in a staff meeting where appropriate. Give volunteers that demonstrate good management or project organizational skills leadership positions. Write a letter of recommendation to your active duty volunteers command, telling them what a great job the volunteer is doing. Nominate them for USO Volunteer of the Quarter. Ask them what they think is an appropriate form of recognition, though most will tell you that it's the thanks they get from the troops and the visitors. It's critical that we keep track of who our volunteers are, what they do, and how many hours they donate. Why? For starters, the IRS requires that nonprofits report on how many volunteers they have in their ranks. Our insurance agents also want to know how many volunteers we have out there so they know what kind of liability coverage to recommend. And keeping track of volunteer statistics helps us make the case for funders. When we have more than 1 million volunteer hours that equate to a human labor contribution of over $21 million, that's something to brag about. It also demonstrates to funders and potential funders that we make efficient and effective use of our resources. In 2010, you and your volunteers will become acquainted with our new web-based tracking system that will make recording volunteer hours and their contact information easy and efficient. You should create a friendly, open work environment for the volunteers where ongoing feedback, suggestions, and input are encouraged. Volunteers can often have great ideas for improving services. They also might have some strong opinions that, when kept suppressed, can cause conflict in your center. So be sure to provide a variety of options for them to give feedback, such as an anonymous suggestion box, a quick evaluation form at the end of a project, and ways to give and get feedback on what's working and what can be improved. But don't just take their information. If they have some good suggestions, see if you can make improvements. And if you see some patterns of complaints, try to work with your volunteers to address those complaints before they become a brush fire or even a towering inferno. Take a minute to get acquainted with the minimum staff standards for working with volunteers found in your handbook. Ensuring the basics of good volunteer management will help you establish a successful relationship with your volunteers. But more important, will make you the best in delivering top-notch services to your visitors. And once you've met the minimum standards, think about what you can do to make your volunteer program the best in the USO network.